Welcome back, everybody. I think it's been about 4 weeks or so. Welcome back to Judaism 201. We're going to talk about this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayera, in which the first of the 7 plagues that we're so familiar with about Pesach, the first of the 7 plagues are in this week's Parsha. And there's 2 questions that everybody asks about the plagues. Anybody who thinks about the Parsha should ask about the plagues. So the first one, I just want to talk about a little bit. And that is, what's the deal with Hashem hardening Paro's heart? Is that fair to Paro? Judaism is intensely believes in free will. So how could Paro do that? How could Hashem do that to Paro? But we're going to focus mostly on the second larger issue is what was the point of having 10 plagues? We'll get to that in a second. So let me talk about the first one first. I'll just mention 3 quick ideas. So the first one is just a simple mita keneged mita, measure for measure. So, what you mete out is what you will reap in the end. And people who have read the Parsha closely may have seen this, or it may have been pointed out, that the first 5 plagues, Paro hardens his own heart. So some of the Meforshim commentaries suggest that Hashem was punishing Paro. And the punishment was, you hardened your own heart for the first 5 plagues, so I'm going to harden your heart and you're going to have to deal with the second group of 5 plagues. That's first answer. A second answer, which I think was given by Rambam, is he sort of substitutes Hashem with the idea of the natural way that people think. And of course, by that, I don't mean substitute, but the idea is that Hashem made us a certain way. And one of the ways that we are made is that sometimes we dig ourselves a hole and we become more stubborn, and in order to get out of the hole, we just keep digging, but we just dig harder. In fact, we actually see that explicitly in the second plague. If you read carefully in this week's Parsha, you'll see that the word tzafardea, the word for frog, for the plague of frogs, the word frog is written in the singular. And so the Medrash picks up on that and from that brings a whole story that one frog came out and the Egyptians struck it with a stick, and then it split into 2 frogs, and they kept hitting the frogs when anybody in their right mind would have noticed, stop hitting them, they're multiplying. But they were so angry that they couldn't think straight. I guess another version of that is sometimes when a person tells a lie, then later on they have to tell another lie to cover up the first one. And then before you know it, you're in a whole web of lies. You get into a psychological rut. Actually is more specifically what I think Rambam was said. You get into a psychological rut, and it becomes harder and harder to get yourself out of that rut. So that when it says Hashem hardened Paro's heart, what Rambam is saying is that now, Hashem didn't do that explicitly. Hashem just made it so that made people. And one of the things we do is we can get into a bad rut, and it just gets harder and harder to get out of it. Of course, he also points out you can get into a good rut also. That's the better rut to be in. And then I believe it's the Sforno gives, I think, the most intriguing of answers. He says that, it's a little bit hard to explain. He says that Hashem wanted Paro to release the Jews from Egypt from his own free will, and that the plagues were making it harder for him to do it from his own heart, from Paro's own heart. And so by making him a bit more stubborn, sort of counteracted the outside pressure that the plagues were exerting upon him. I hope that's a bit understandable. The best analogy I've come up with is, suppose I put a gun to your head and I say, give tzedakah. So yeah, you'll give tzedakah, right? Anybody would. And the gun was sort of Hashem here, or the plagues were the gun. And he wanted Paro, say in my analogy, to give tzedakah out of his own heart, not because he's being pressured by the plagues. So in order to balance out that pressure, he made Paro more stubborn, hardening his heart. The second two answers that I just gave, one is that it's a natural consequence, and two, it's giving back his free will, so to speak, begs a larger question, which is the second issue that I want to focus, that's going to be the focus of the rest of this year, is why go through all of that? I mean, traditionally, when we first learn the story when we're kids, the plagues are seen as a way to free B'nei Yisroel, right? You know, Paro says no, you keep exerting the pressure, and finally, after the 10th plague, Paro breaks down and says, yes, fine. So the first question is, well, why couldn't you just skip to the 10th plague? Or even better, maybe a more humane, if the Egyptians deserved humaneness or not, maybe a more humane way is, you know, you could do the plague of darkness, right, where the Midrash tells us that nobody could move or get out of their place. You could do the plague of darkness, and then everybody could just leave, you know, have that plague be for a whole week, and B'nai Yisrael can leave and get to the sea. Why go through all these plagues? So that is our main question. So I'd like to share a source sheet with you. I'd share screen here. And I'm going to mention the following sentence twice. The twice is that I really like this because, here we go. Because the answers to all these questions are actually right in the text. We don't have to use a Rashi. We don't have to use a Midrash. It's all right in the text. So we'll see it. Here we go. So the first thing is I wanted to bring the very famous short passage from the Passover Haggadah that we see every year. We spill a drop of wine for each of the 10 plagues. And then at the end, we spill 3 more because Rabbi Yehuda grouped these under 3 acronyms: Tetzach, Adash, Bachav. And when I was younger, I used to try to crack the joke, oh yeah, that makes it easier to remember the plagues. What's Rabbi Yehuda doing there? So, of course, as we all know, whenever anything happens in the Gemara, there's almost always a deeper answer to that. So let's look at that. So first of all, Rabbi Yehuda grouped them into 3 groups. So let's take a look at those groups here. So here's a summary of the 10 plagues. And the first thing we notice, the most obvious thing here, is that there is a cycle of 3 for each of the plagues. So for now, like for the next 10 or 15 minutes, let's ignore the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. Let's just talk about the 9 plagues. So we see 3 groups of 3. So we see for the first plague, there was a warning. Moshe and Aaron went to the Nile, station yourself at the Nile, in the morning, and explained to Paro what's going on. And then the second plague is just Hashem says, go to Paro. So they go to Paro's palace. And then the third plague, there's no warning at all. It just happens. And then the same pattern results in 4, 5, and 6, and the same pattern results in 7, 8, and 9. Probably many of you are already aware of that. You know, the third one here, an interesting one is that each of the third, 6th, and 9th that don't get a warning, it's almost as if Hashem is saying, you know, Hashem gives chances, but by the time you get to the 3rd time, there's no need for warning, and this punishment, this is the punishment that hits home. Another thing about the 3rd, 6th, and 9th plague is that it affects their bodies. The lice is on their body, the boils on their body, the darkness, Al-Pi Midrash, is sort of on their body. They couldn't move, it is said. Whereas all the other plagues were on their property or their houses or their land. We'll get to that. Now, so that is within each 3. Now let's look at the 3 in general. first three plagues here seem like fairly normal plagues. Well, as you could as normal as plagues could be. They're your standard plagues here: blood, frogs, and lice. Although we know from the text it gets increasingly difficult, and actually Paro's magicians were able, the text tells us, were able to duplicate somewhat the first two plagues, but they couldn't duplicate the third one. The second group is pretty interesting. Because Hashem starts to give a bunch of specificity to it. So this here, this source number 3 here, is the beginning of the fourth plague. So this is the beginning of the second group, 4 through 6, right? So as you can see, the text says, and on that day I'm going to set apart my people, so that no swarms will be there, so that you may know I'm in the midst of the land, and I'll make a distinction between my people and your people. And we see this again in the plague number 5, that Hashem is going to make a division, make a distinction. Here we go. But Hashem will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of the Egyptians. So Hashem is more involved, giving more instructions. What's interesting about that one actually is, if you look in source 5, after the 5th plague, Paro went out to check, because he got that warning that Hashem was only going to strike the livestock of the Egyptians, but he went out to see if that's what really happened. And of course, that's what really happened. So there's some sort of common theme going on with the second group, with plagues 4, 5, and 6. And we see another, a different theme for plagues 7, 8, and 9. Notice the similarity in language here. So before plague 7, we have, I'm going to rain down hail such as not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded. This is like unprecedented power. And what's interesting, the Midrash tells us that the hail had fire inside of it. And those of us of our age, of my age, of my generation, actually my kids are aware of this too. If you, in the movie, The 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, I was happy to see that they accurately had that plague. It was hail that came down, like little balls of fire were coming down. One of the things that Sean and I used to do with the kids, we used to watch various movies of the Exodus or this or that, and we would compare the movies, or the kids took great delight in pointing out which was correct according to our tradition and which was incorrect. We see in the next plague, the 8th plague, the same thing. The plague of locusts here. It's going to be such a plague. The same language is used here. Something that neither your fathers or your fathers' fathers have ever seen since the day they appeared on earth. So what do we make of all this? We have now, so we have 3 groups of plagues, and then within and each of the groups of 3 also seem to have a common theme. So this is the second time I'm going to say this sentence. Again, the answer is right in the text itself. I love this. I call this hiding in plain sight. This is the pasuk before the first group of three. Hashem says, "By this you shall know that I am the Lord." And what we see is that Hashem is telling us why he's doing the first plagues. He wants Paro and the Egyptians to know that there is a God. And the lesson worked. Recall, after the 3rd plague, I just mentioned earlier, right, that the magicians were able to somewhat duplicate the first 2 plagues, but they couldn't duplicate the 3rd one. And what did they say when they couldn't do the 3rd one? They said, "This is the finger of God." And some people connect that to why when we dip out our wine, the minhag of many is to use our finger to take out 10 drops of wine. This is the finger of God, they said. So the lesson worked. All right. This is the pasuk that comes in between plague and 4. Notice the similarity of language in blue here. It says that you may know. But what should they know? That I am the Lord in the midst of the land. So this lesson is telling us that Hashem is involved in our lives on an individual basis. Hashem can make distinctions between the Mitzri and B'nei Yisroel, and then, of course, further distinctions. In other words, Hashem can interact with us individually. All right, what about plagues 7, 8, and 9? Right, what did we see before up here? Hashem kept threatening, like with the hail, that such has not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded and so forth. So before plagues 7, 8, and 9, we have this pasuk. It says, so that you may know. So notice, so the first thing you notice, right? Before each group of 3, Hashem tells us why he's giving the plagues, and he uses the phrase, so that you shall know. In the Hebrew, the word teda is used each time. Bezos teda, I think here it says Laman teda, here it says Ba'avor teda, so that you shall know. And then the phrase that follows it is a lesson that he wants us to learn. So that there is a Hashem, the second group, you may know that I am Lord in the midst of your land. In other words, that Hashem is involved in our affairs. And then the third lesson is that so that you may know there is none like me in all the world. Okay, so let's take that. I just want to ask and answer another question. Why those 3 lessons? I mean, they're sort of self-explanatory, but there's something a little bit deeper or specific going on in the text, which I think is kind of neat. This is the very beginning, before the first time that Moshe and Aaron appeared before Paro. And that's the famous phrase, let my people go. And people, as we all know, people forget the second half of that, so that they may serve me, right? And how does Paro answer? Look at this answer. It says, who is this Lord that I should go heed him? I do not know that same word. I do not know the Lord, and I'm not going to let him go. So let's break that down, right? So how do you overcome that? It's very simple. First, Paro needs to understand that Hashem exists. Don't come to me and say, who is the Lord? I don't know him. Okay. So if you do, I'm going to let him know that I exist. And those were the first 3 plagues. And then the second 3 plagues, that I will not let Israel go. I will not let Israel, I do not know, Lord, I will not let Israel go, seem to, Paro is saying, you're not the boss of me, or your God is not the boss of me. Anybody who has had kids has heard that line before, right? You're not the boss, your God is not the boss of me. So what Paro is saying here is that your Hashem is not in control of me, can't make me do it. And even if he could try, I've got my own Egyptian gods. And so lesson number 2 is that, you know what, Hashem can be involved in your life, Paro. And lesson number 3, plague 7, 8, and 9, is that, and I, Hashem, are more powerful than anything you've ever heard of. So don't think your Egyptian gods are going to save you. So just to review that part, so the goal of these first 9 plagues are, first, he has to admit that Hashem exists. Then he has to admit, or he has to learn, that Hashem can get involved with human affairs, even to the most minor of details. And then that Hashem is the supreme power. And those are the 3 lessons exactly we learn. And those are the 3 lessons that the Torah tells us, that those are the reasons why these plagues are happening. All right, so those are the 9 plagues. I'm going to get back to them in a second when I sum up. Let's talk about the 10th plague. So what about the 10th plague? It seems that the 10th plague was for the purpose of freeing B'nei Yisroel. In a way, it was always in the background, ready to be used for this purpose. And also as a punishment, another mida keneged mida, punishment, we remember at the very beginning of the whole story, Paro wanted all the firstborn males, or all the males of B'nei Yisroel, to be thrown into the river, right? We all know that. So this is his appropriate punishment. So all of Paro's firstborn, all of Mitzrayim's firstborn males will be killed as punishment. So what I'm suggesting is that the 10th plague is indeed how we traditionally view all the plagues, as both a punishment and as a way to free B'nai Yisrael. But I'm also suggesting, again, right from the text, I think it's clearly backed by the text, that the first 9 plagues were for educational purposes. And of course, not just educational purposes for Mitzrayim, because if it was, then we really wouldn't even need this in the Torah. And after all, a whole lot of them died while chasing B'nai Yisrael through the sea, like every soldier. But those are lessons also for us. So I want to bring a Ramban, a Nachmanides, that sort of tells us the same lesson, fits perfectly with this. It's as though he is responding to our shir here today. He asks a question. He says, why do so many of our mitzvahs include Zecher L'tzias Mitzrayim? Tefillin, mezuzah, the first and fourth commandments. In fact, I have the text here. Let's see. The Shema. Here we go. This is the mitzvah for tefillin. It says it shall serve for you as a sign in your hand, as a reminder on your forehead, that with a mighty hand Hashem freed you from Egypt. So tefillin is supposed to be connected to leaving Egypt. And then the command for tzitzis, same thing. Actually, the command for tzitzis comes in the Shema. So these are the last 3 pesukim of the Shema that we are commanded to say twice a day. Your tzitzis, you recall all the mitzvahs, and look at the last line of the Shema. I am Hashem, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. And while we're at it, let's go to the first sentence of the 10 commandments. I am Hashem, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Note, it doesn't say, I am Hashem, your God, who created the universe, which is a more impressive task, I think. But what do I know? I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So why do we have all that? Why is everything connected? When we say Kiddush, right? We say Kiddush on Friday night. We say Zecher L'tzias Mitzrayim. Why are so many mitzvahs connected to Zecher L'tzias Mitzrayim? The Ramban gives a great answer. He says, once idolatry was introduced into the world, people have gotten confused and diverged from true beliefs. Some believe, this is interesting because he's describing, I think he lived in the 1300s in Spain. What his words are as applicable today as ever. He said that some believe the universe always existed. In other words, there was no creation, there was no God. And actually, most of the world believed that until it was about 100 years ago when the Big Bang Theory, when scientists hypothesized that, when they saw the redshift in astronomy, the Doppler, not the Doppler effect. The man who discovered it was if you Google Hubble, the space telescope was named after him. The astronomer Hubble was the one who hypothesized that if stars are expanding, there must have been a start. There must have been a Big Bang of sorts. There must have been a beginning to our universe. And actually, most of the world did not believe that before he came along, which is only about 100 years ago. That was a tangent. Okay, but the Ramban is saying the same thing. That some believe the universe always existed. Some believe Hashem exists, but isn't involved with worldly affairs. This fits perfectly with the lessons that are our takeaway today. And then he says, when people see open miracles, then they understand that Hashem exists and Hashem is involved with our affairs. And whereas we might have a philosophical idea in our minds, when we see the miracles, it turns it into a reality. He says that the person who experiences something like this will be convinced of the true nature of God, the true nature of things. And this is what was happening to B'nei Yisroel. We consider the historical context, right? A nation was being born. They had grown in size into a sizable people, but they had still been in exile and slavery. And now they were to emerge as an independent entity, a nation in charge of its own affairs. And Hashem felt it essential that the Jewish nation would be born with the existence of God in the forefront of their minds. So, and then the Ramban says, because Hashem is not going to perform open miracles in every generation. Now, you might ask why, and that's a question that is above my grade level. I don't know. But he takes it as, he says, because Hashem is not going to create miracles all the time. Whenever anybody needs a proof of God, Hashem's not going to drop everything and perform miracles for us. And here's the important thing that he says. He says, because of that, we have mitzvahs that will constantly remind us of what we saw with our own eyes, our ancestors' eyes, right? So when we do put on tefillin or say the Shema, or when we ponder the 10 Commandments, or when we make or hear Kiddush on Friday night, Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. So, in summary, we have a new understanding of the role of the 10 plagues, that the first 9 were to teach us of fundamental theological lessons to the Egyptians and also to the Jewish people. Again, the 3 lessons are Hashem exists, Hashem is involved in our affairs, and Hashem is all powerful. We could sum that up into 3 words if we wanted to: existence, providence, and omnipotence. And further, we have from this an understanding of why so many mitzvahs, or a context of so many mitzvahs where the context connects them to Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, connects them to the fact that Hashem took us out of Egypt. So I hope that explains a little bit. So now you have something for your Shabbos table, and you have something for your Seder table. And thus ends today's recording. I'll ask for questions. Let me hit stop here.